Thanks to Clean My Mac for sponsoring this video.
The next iPhone is coming sooner than you think.
Welcome to the All Future Podcast, where we talk all things Apple, tech, AI, and various things throughout the week. If you are watching these videos, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing. And today we are talking about the next iPhone that is coming sooner than you may expect. And that is because this is the updated iPhone SE, which is actually kind of a very exciting release. In the past, I think iPhone SEs and their refreshes, they always fall by the wayside. We're especially on like a podcast like this where we're talking about the latest and greatest Apple stuff. It's like, oh yeah, they released this thing. It's their cheaper version. But this time, they're actually kind of bringing it up to spec to a degree because it's going to be capable of Apple Intelligence. So there's a few things that are rumored for this, but we do have new updates from suppliers saying that the camera module being supplied for the iPhone SE 4 is set to begin mass production of its components in December.
Right, so on the way, and like you said, I agree with you, right? Like normally, like no one really cares about the SE in the Apple rumor leaks zone, right? But having Apple Intelligence, that's a little bit of a feature, a lot of bit of a feature, really. And it's going to be the cheapest way to get Apple Intelligence on a phone. I think the iPad Mini is still going to be the cheapest way overall, if I'm not mistaken. But it's going to put Apple Intelligence in more people's hands and in people who are probably not the cutting edge tech people, right? Like no one who's super into phones and staying updated gets the SE. It's much more for, people who are trying to save money or kids or whatever it is. And I would say, interestingly, and I know that kind of the temperature of the room out there, a lot of people with Apple Intelligence so far have been kind of like, that's all right. This is fine. like no one's like, oh, this is super cool. But as those new features roll out, I think it's going to be more and more impressive. And especially when it's the kind of flashier things are out of beta. And this phone is going to be getting released probably right around the time where a lot of those features are going to be ready for prime time and out. When they're out of beta, when they're ready. So we're talking, at some point, mid 2025, spring 2025, whatever it ends up being. There's a few different rumors on the date, but this is going to be, I think, an exciting thing for a lot of people, and is going to do something I think is good overall, and that's letting more people use this super high-end technology. Man, it's wild. It's wild that for a relatively small amount, people are going to be able to use these highly advanced artificial intelligence models in their pockets. So it's pretty rad.
Yeah, definitely very cool. And as far as the date, the rumor is, it has been March to April is when this would be released. And then typically Apple's suppliers start producing about 3 months ahead of time. So a December date for that kind of tracks with a potential March release of that device. And then as far as pricing and everything, we're expecting it to be about $499. It's going to have one camera on the back, but it's going to have Face ID, basically be the same specs as an iPhone 14, and then upgrade that to a 6.1-inch display. And they are expecting to sell a lot of these because suppliers are supposed to produce about 8.6 million iPhone SE 4 units throughout the first quarter of next year.
But, Ryan, here's the thing, though. iPhone SE, that's not what we're here to talk about. No one is nearly going to be as excited for that as they are iPhone 18. That's right. We're skipping ahead. We're going to talk about the iPhone 18 camera, and it's got some, I think, exciting camera features for kind of a camera nerd kind of person like me. And I'm interested to see why Apple is putting them in there. And that is this idea of a variable aperture on a camera phone.
Yeah. So first we have iPhone 17 is supposed to bring a 48 megapixel camera also to the telephoto lens. Apparently that's going to be the big 17 update. But then we skip ahead to 18 and they're going to do these upgrades, which the main one is that variable aperture. So right now you have a fixed aperture on your iPhone camera, and so aperture is how much light is let into the lens, and it's only one way that the iPhone does it. If you're used to using an actual lens, it's going to get smaller or bigger, and the byproduct of that ends up being depth of field. So a blurred background when it's super open, or everything's in focus when it's super closed. And so the iPhone will emulate this with things like portrait mode and cinematic mode, and you can even edit your photos after the fact to change what your aperture number is and all of that stuff. But this is going to allow you to actually do that function. I'm just curious to see how much it will actually let you do that, and then how much of a difference it makes compared to just their software cheating version of it, I guess, as you might call it.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's not gonna be like a like a professional lens where it goes from f2 to f16 or something crazy like that. It's probably going to be something like 1.8 to 3.5 or something, something in that kind of zone. And here's my theory that I'm basing off of no factual information, just me randomly pulling something from the universe and thinking about it, right? They can, like you mentioned, in software already fake kind of depth of field and things like that. I'm shooting in cinematic mode right now on an iPhone, and that's why the background is blurred, right? That's not because of the actual physical elements in the lens doing that. So I don't think they're doing it for a more cinematic or pleasing photographic portrait kind of look. I think they're doing it, and I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't know if you've kind of heard this from people. Like the whole idea that the iPhone camera has gotten worse in certain conditions over time. Like everyone's like, oh, like the iPhone, I think like 13 even was like the peak of iPhone photography, like across the board. And now obviously these cameras have improved and they're better at a lot of things. But a lot of people will describe it as kind of like a mushy feel to it, maybe, and on their photos. And that seems to have gotten worse over time for some reason. And I think what's happening is Apple's doing so much post-processing on these photos that whereas before, it would take the photo, it would do the best it could in low light, and maybe it would get some grain, it maybe have a little bit of problems in it, but that would actually be a more aesthetically pleasing photo. But what they do now with all this post-processing, they're making all these changes to it. They're adjusting the colors and the contrast changes and all this kind of stuff, like every digital camera does. But they're doing it in a way that some photos kind of look like garbage after. And I think if you put in a variable aperture, like they're talking about here, it'll allow you to capture stuff in a better way in the raw photo, like in the actual data that's coming into the camera. So then when you apply all that post-processing, it's a more pleasing image.
Sometimes the effectiveness of any piece of technology boils down to simplicity. So any Mac device can be made more secure and organized with Clean My Mac. And this is your ultimate solution for Mac control and care.
And it's not just about cleaning your Mac. It's a full service app, does a lot of different things for you. It's got a sleek user interface, gives you complete control on how your Mac performs.
The cleanup feature is the first one you're obviously thinking about, and that is removing system cache, development junk, and unnecessary files that take up space or prevent essential updates on your computer. And then the My Clutter feature will dive into your downloads and quickly eliminate duplicates.
Their System and Menu app lets you tackle problems like battery drain and overheating without even having to open the app.
And all of this is comprised with Smart Scan, which is just one button that you click to scan your whole computer and see all of these things take place. One piece of that is the anti-malware tool, which will automatically remove viruses, ensuring your Mac stays completely threat-free. And I was excited because I clicked this and I had no threats on my computer, so I feel safe.
That's right. Your Mac should be your digital oasis. You should have an optimal work environment with less distractions so you can really get that productivity done.
Clean My Mac is available for purchase on the MacPaw website, Mac App Store, and Set App. Click the link in the description below for a 7-day free trial. So this particular information is coming from Kuo, which has been kind of a reliable source at this point, and they had a post talking about the iPhone 17 Slim, the M5 MacBook Pro, and the iPhone 18, and how it will affect Apple's supplier Sunny Optical, which is in charge of a lot of the elements for the shutter and everything with their cameras. So I would definitely be excited to see this because it gets us closer and closer to that lens, but there's always going to be that difference where you're having to do a certain amount of fake or trickery on an iPhone just because everything is so small compared to a physical camera with a large lens and everything. But we're getting closer and closer to where we're able to get these things to look really good. Like you're shocked that this photo was taken on an iPhone. And so I'm just always excited for little improvements like that. But yeah, do you think this will ever get you? Do you think there's some innovation they could get us to that you would stop using a camera, Matt?
I mean, we're already there already for the most part, right? Like, I mean, I obviously I own nice cameras and stuff, but again, I'm shooting on an iPhone right now because it's the most convenient thing for me to shoot here where I'm at. So, and that old adage, the best camera is the one you have with you, right? So I, it, I mean, there's obviously situations where you want that more professional kind of camera, but those situations are getting less and less and less, right, man? It's at this point, a lot of people have those cameras because that's what they need in order to get people to hire them to take photos, even though they could take the photos with their iPhone maybe, and it would almost be the exact same, like
Yeah.
outside of like high end sports photography and stuff, or wedding photography and things like that, like the iPhone or any camera phone or of a flagship device is going to do what a camera is meant to do, and that's capture some kind of memory, right? And they're going to do that better and better and better, and having it in your pocket is just a better solution for 99.9% of people, and that number continues to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, even though I love shooting with long lenses and getting a great, I don't know, like squashed image that way. So I still am loving it when I'm shooting a car or something with a lens. But there's definite situations, especially when I'm in the car, where I'm trying to adjust everything manually to get this shot that I want. And then I'm like, and I just pull out my phone and then it gets it just on auto, and it figures out what I was trying to accomplish so much quicker. So yeah, you're right. It's lessening how many situations you're going to need this camera. And so improvements like this, I'm always excited to see. So on the camera side, that might be the big innovation with the iPhone 18. And maybe they'd have something they can show off as to why it's so much better, how much better your photos can be. But beyond that, let's say the iPhone 18 comes around. What kind of stuff do you want to see? Because we're expecting somewhat of a redesign in a 17 Slim of some sort, which we'll get to in a second. But if an 18 is kind of basically the same, I don't know. What are they going to do to make you upgrade if you don't upgrade for the 17?
Dude, they cannot make that phone the same, dude. That's crazy, right? I don't think they can make the 17 the same. Like even not just talking about the Air, but just like whatever, like an iPhone 17 Pro. That's gonna have to be a different looking phone, right? Like it's the design language is getting old. It's eventually going to start hurting the upgrade cycle. It probably already does, in fact. So at a point, right, like Apple's like always doing the math, and they're like, well, it costs us this amount to redesign the components in the factories and all that kind of stuff, but we only lose so much percentage of people who are not upgrading because the design's not different. But eventually that shifts, and all of a sudden it's cheaper, and you actually make more money by spending the time to do the redesign, refigure out the machining of the parts and design, like everything that goes along with that. And then you're gonna get so many more people upgrading that redesign pays for itself. They're at the tipping point right now, I think. That's already a huge complaint about Apple. And heck, the current design language is the iPhone 4 design language, right? Like they went back to a previous design. One of the first, that's a over 10-year-old phone at this point, I want to say, right? So like that's they got to change the design, man. That'd be crazy not to.
Yeah, and you can see it in so many ways, like the fact that they moved the cameras for the phones that only have two, and then they put them like diagonal for 1 year, and then they put them back. It was like, I'm pretty sure there was no purpose for that other than you can see the back of a phone and know which year it is.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff like that where that's not doing anything functional or adding to the design. In fact, that actually prevented that phone setup from being able to be used for spatial video, which may have been intentional as well. But they really need to get on the giving us something new and different so that people get excited about these phones beyond some specific aperture photo feature like this.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's great transition there, right? Let's talk about the 17 Air. And I guess the new rumor is it's not going to be as thin as they wanted it to be for whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
And I guess like I know I've said many times that I'm kind of interested in this phone. Are you excited about this thing? Do you think this would be cool?
I'm definitely excited to see it and interested because it's a different thing like we've been talking about. I feel like I'd still go Pro for like multiple cameras if this didn't have it, but I'm very curious to see what this will be.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we're talking millimeters here, right? But it does start to make a difference. Like you don't think like the difference between whatever 6 and 7 millimeters is that big of a deal. But I will say my phone feels so much thicker than my iPad. Well, because it is, right? So that makes sense. But but It's noticeable though. You absolutely notice it. Like when I pick up my iPad, my 13-inch iPad Pro, I'm like, man, this thing is thin. This is nice. It has like it's thin enough for to give you that kind of like whatever that is in our brains that can notice those subtle differences and go, oh, like there's something a little. Let's get a little more pep in its step. I don't know. Like it just feels a little more exciting when I pick it up, and yeah. So that's I think that if they can replicate that feeling in the phone, and I don't know how thin that needs to be. I don't know where that tipping point is when you actually notice it and it feels a little better. But I would be excited to get this phone, I think.
So apparently the details here are that this design relies on a thinner substrate within the battery and how it's manufactured. So it's dependent on that, and they're apparently not entirely succeeding in that regard. So this is pushing them back a little bit on this, and then, this is coming up. They're going to have to get suppliers in advance. They have to launch this phone to and already have units produced by that point. So if this technology, I'm sure they have an end date where they know if we're not there and this can be scaled, we have to ditch this and we have to go thicker on this design. So that will be disappointing because it will be, not quite as thin as things like that iPad Pro that you talked about or the iPod Nano, which was I loved the iPod Nano back in the day, but that's an example they're still giving us for thin devices.
Do you in the notes does it say how thin the iPod Nano was?
I think it says that it was 5.4 millimeters thick, and the 13-inch iPad Pro is 5.1.
Yeah, dang. Yeah, I remember that Nano was a great design, like the iPod Nano. That was, I believe, the most popular selling iPhone for a period. Like a lot of people got that instead of the thicker, regular iPod, which eventually got called the iPod Classic, but at the time was just a regular iPod. And yeah, it was such and it had that feeling too, right? Like when you would pick that thing up, like those iPod Nanos, you'd go, oh, like this feels interesting. Like it feels like a whole different kind of device. You got a joy from holding it that I think Apple is so good at capturing sometimes that is really the secret sauce, I think, that has made Apple as successful as it has been, is that people just really like to use their stuff, right? It just does something in your brain when you hold these things. It's like, I just like this. I enjoy doing it. I want to use this. And yeah, like I guess we'll see if they can pull it off with this Air. I suspect they will. I still think it's going to be thin enough and be a cool enough and a different enough design that I'm going to want to go for one.
Yeah, I think the MacBook Air still very much has that effect. I was at my parents' house. I don't have a MacBook Air, so I'm not using one like ever. I'm usually using a MacBook Pro 14-inch. And so my mom handed me a MacBook Air, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is wow. This it's so thin, and this is so capable. This is amazing. So yeah, trying to capture that same feeling with a phone, I think would be a great thing for them to do. Of course, people are going to put cases on it, but it still trickles down to where you're used to a thicker phone with a case versus you're used to a thinner phone with a case. It's still going to be a difference that you will feel. But apparently this would be replacing an iPhone 16 Plus, and that is currently 7.8 millimeters thick. So if they're trying to get in the same ballpark as the iPad Pro and iPod Nano, that would be shaving off about 2 or a little bit more millimeters. And maybe they can't do it, as we're hearing now, because of this battery issue. But we'll see. We'll see if they can get it to a point where they can advertise it like this is the slimmest iPhone we've ever made type of thing, or if it's just going to be like, oh, it's thinner. It's a decent amount thinner than last year. What I would love to see as well is for this iPhone to be somehow different enough that one of those little icons that they do to represent a device can show you that it's an iPhone 17. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, like the little simplified drawings, the kind of things that they do for the icons. Yeah. So right now the current one has the it's a rectangle with the pill at the top to represent an iPhone. So yeah, like how would that change? Like it's not a pill anymore at the top. The edges are more rounded or something like that. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, some way to distinguish this from previous years.
That's the mark. That's the mark of if the redesign is a big enough redesign. Do they have to change the icon or not?
Yeah, I think that'll be the thing. So Apple, if you have to change the little icon, you're on the right track, and us customers are going to be happy.
Absolutely.